You were taught to believe that real change announces itself loudly, that if something important is happening, it must arrive with intensity, emotional chaos, or some kind of internal breakdown. That awakening looks dramatic, that alignment feels overwhelming, and if none of that is happening, then maybe nothing is really changing. Here's the quiet injustice in that belief. The struggle was never required, not as proof, not as payment, not as preparation. It was learned, conditioned, repeated until it felt normal to equate noise with meaning. But this shift you're moving through now was never designed to feel explosive. It was never meant to disrupt your life or knock you off balance. In fact, the opposite. What's happening is subtle, stabilizing, internally noticeable in a way that's easy to dismiss if you're still listening for thunder instead of silence. You may already feel it, a strange calm where there used to be pressure, a pause where reaction used to live, a sense that something has changed, but you don't yet have language for it, and because it doesn't match the stories you were told, part of you wonders if it's real. This is where things get interesting. This moment isn't random, it isn't luck, and it isn't an external force descending on you. It's timing meeting readiness, a signal that only becomes visible when you're no longer straining to see it. You didn't summon it, you didn't miss it, you simply reached the point where it could register. Here's the twist: nothing new is actually arriving, no extra power is being added, no special energy is being injected into your life. What's happening instead is simpler and more unsettling to old narratives. Something false is dissolving, something unnecessary is loosening its grip. And when that happens, what remains feels quiet, obvious, and strangely familiar. That's why this doesn't feel like a breakthrough, it feels like recognition. You're hearing this now for a reason, not because tomorrow changes everything, but because understanding this changes how you interpret what's already shifting. Once you see it this way, it can't be unseen, and the signal you were waiting for suddenly stops shouting and starts making sense. Now let's clear up what this actually is, and what it was never meant to be. Most people hear Mars enters Aquarius and immediately look outward. They expect predictions, events, sudden turns, something happening to them, and when none of that appears, they either force meaning or dismiss the moment entirely. But that framing misses the point. This isn't about spectacle, it's not about fate rearranging your life overnight, and it's definitely not about fear, pressure, or urgency coming from the outside. The truth is much simpler. What's shifting here is not the world around you, but the way energy moves through you. Mars isn't announcing conflict or action in the way you were taught to imagine. In this context, it represents how you initiate, respond, and direct momentum. Aquarius isn't chaos or rebellion, it's distance, perspective, the ability to step back just enough to see clearly instead of reacting automatically. So when these two meet, the shift isn't dramatic, it's internal orientation, a recalibration in how action connects to awareness. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't about something new entering your system, it's about responsiveness changing tone, less impulsive, less emotionally charged, more precise, more intentional, even when you're not consciously trying to be. You may notice that situations which used to provoke you now feel quieter, not because you're suppressing anything, but because the urgency has drained out of them. Your reactions slow down, your decisions feel cleaner, not heavier, not lighter, just clearer. But this isn't something you have to activate through effort. There's no ritual required, no mindset to force, no behavior to perform. This alignment works because it bypasses strain altogether. Action energy begins to align with awareness instead of reaction. That's the mechanism, simple, almost too simple to trust, which is why it often goes unnoticed. You already experience this in small ways, pausing before replying, letting something pass without commentary, choosing not to engage when you normally would. These moments feel insignificant, but they're not. This phase amplifies them. It makes them more available, more frequent, more natural. And instead of pushing you to do more, it invites you to notice more. That's the bridge, not changing what you do, but changing where attention rests. observation over control, awareness over management. When you stop trying to direct every internal movement, the system settles on its own. Overthinking loses traction. Emotional escalation fades before it can build. This is experiential, not intellectual. You don't learn it, you recognize it, and once recognized, it starts showing up everywhere. But not everyone notices it at the same pace, and that difference has nothing to do with being chosen or advanced. It has everything to do with something else entirely. In a previous video, someone left a comment that captured this moment perfectly. They didn't describe fireworks or revelation. They talked about fear showing up quietly, about realizing that an old version of themselves was ending without ceremony, about feeling relief and uncertainty at the same time. Courage, not the loud kind, but the kind that feels like standing still and not running back to what's familiar. What stood out wasn't what changed in their life. It was what stopped needing to be defended. They said it felt like letting go of a role they'd been performing for so long, they forgot it was optional. There was grief in that, and freedom, and an unexpected calm underneath both. That comment matters because it mirrors where many of you are right now. This stage doesn't announce itself as growth. It feels like something quietly stepping aside, an identity loosening, a pattern no longer insisting, and because there's no dramatic replacement yet, the mind labels it as uncertainty. But this is where alignment actually begins. This transition asks for a kind of courage that isn't visible, the courage to not fill the space immediately, the courage to let the old self end without rushing to define the new one. And that's uncomfortable precisely because it's unfamiliar. But this is not regression, it's readiness. Some people feel this shift faster, others barely notice it at first. And the difference isn't intelligence, spirituality, or effort. It isn't about being special. It comes down to how much resistance is still attached to internal quiet. Because the moment things slow down, the moment noise drops, whatever you've been using to define yourself gets exposed. And if you're deeply attached to those definitions, roles, reactions, mental commentary, the system pushes back, not because something is wrong, but because something is dissolving. This is where things begin to separate, not people from people, but openness from resistance. And understanding that difference changes how you experience everything that comes next. Readiness is not a badge. Resistance is not a flaw. They're simply states of relationship with inner quiet. When you're ready, silence doesn't feel empty. It feels spacious. When resistance is active, the same silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening. And that's why some people sense this shift immediately, while others feel restless, distracted, or oddly impatient without knowing why. Attachment is the key variable. Not attachment to people or outcomes, but attachment to internal noise, to commentary, to constant interpretation, to the familiar pressure of reacting quickly so nothing feels unresolved. If your sense of self has been built around urgency, around responding, fixing, explaining, proving, then a moment like this feels disorienting, because the fuel that kept those patterns running is thinning out. And here's the part most people misunderstand. The resistance doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means the old system is still trying to operate in an environment that no longer feeds it. The real block isn't fear, it isn't doubt, it isn't lack of discipline or awareness. It's noise, constant input, constant stimulation, a conditioned belief that if you're not thinking, reacting, or moving, you're falling behind. Modern life amplifies this block effortlessly. Notifications, opinions, comparisons, endless commentary, all of it trains the nervous system to stay alert, to stay busy, to stay slightly tense. And in that state, subtle alignment signals get drowned out. So when clarity begins to emerge quietly, it doesn't register as guidance. It registers as boredom, or emptiness, or something to scroll past. But that quiet is not absence, it's precision. When the noise drops, even briefly, you can feel how much energy was being spent maintaining friction. And once you feel that contrast, it becomes harder to go back. Not because you're forcing change, but because awareness has shifted position. This is why timing matters, not because something bad will happen if you miss it, but because moments like this loosen loops that have been running on autopilot. And if they're not noticed, those loops quietly tighten again. The question is whether the shift is happening. It's whether it's being heard, and what follows depends entirely on that recognition. Urgency here has nothing to do with fear. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is punishing you. This is not a countdown, it's momentum. Moments like this create a slight opening, a thinning of old patterns, a softening of habits that usually run without question. And when that opening is noticed, even briefly, direction shifts with very little effort. When it's ignored, the system doesn't break, but it defaults. Familiar loops resume. The same reactions get reinforced, not because you failed, but because repetition always wins without awareness. That's why timing matters, not dramatically, quietly. Here's the twist. You don't miss these windows in obvious ways. You miss them by explaining them away, by telling yourself nothing is happening, by waiting for something louder, clearer, more convincing. And in doing so, you reinforce the idea that subtle clarity doesn't count. But subtle clarity is exactly what changes trajectories. When you notice it, the shift is small but unmistakable. The body settles, decisions take less energy, you stop rehearsing conversations that never happen, you respond instead of react. There's less inner argument, less need to justify your choices to yourself. You may find yourself pausing more often, not out of hesitation, but because rushing no longer feels necessary. The tension that used to push you forward loosens, not into passivity, but into steadiness. This doesn't come with euphoria. It comes with grounded presence, a sense that you're standing where you are instead of leaning into the next moment. And because it's unfamiliar, the mind tries to label it. Is this boredom? Am I losing motivation? Why does everything feel quieter? But this is where things get interesting. That quiet isn't depletion, it's efficiency. Energy is no longer leaking into unnecessary friction. And as that happens, your responses sharpen, not emotionally, but precisely. You say less, you mean more, you choose with less explanation. These are the first shifts. They don't announce themselves as transformation. They feel almost too ordinary to matter, which is why they're so easy to overlook. And yet once they begin, something else follows, a brief, awkward phase that many people misunderstand completely. If you don't recognize it, you might think something has gone wrong, but in reality, it's the clearest confirmation there is. When clarity first settles in, it can feel strangely empty, not peaceful in the way you imagined, not exciting, just open. And for a mind used to constant input, that openness can feel like something is missing. This is the disorientation phase, and it's normal. Old identity patterns don't disappear all at once. They fade, they lose urgency, they stop demanding attention. And when that happens, there's a gap between who you were reacting as and who you're beginning to respond as. That gap can feel awkward, unfamiliar, even slightly unsettling. The mind asks questions. What am I supposed to do now? Why don't I feel the same drive? Am I losing something? But this discomfort is not a warning, it's a confirmation. What's actually happening is integration. The system is recalibrating without the usual noise to guide it. You're no longer being pulled forward by pressure or backward by habit. And until a new baseline settles, that in-between can feel unsteady. This is where many people try to rush. They label the quiet as a problem and fill it with activity, distraction, or old patterns just to feel oriented again. But doing so restarts the very loops that were loosening. If you let the awkwardness exist without fixing it, something stabilizes on its own. A new sense of alignment forms, not built on effort, built on clarity. You are not late, you are not broken, and you are not behind. Nothing about this process requires perfection or constant awareness. It unfolds as readiness allows, and readiness isn't something you force, it's something you notice. Trust the timing, trust the simplicity, trust that what's aligning now is doing so because the conditions are finally quiet enough to support it. If something in this resonated, If you felt that recognition rather than excitement, you can acknowledge it with a simple like. If you know someone who's been feeling the same subtle shift but can't quite name it, sharing this may help them see it more clearly. And if you want to stay connected to this kind of clarity-focused perspective as things continue to unfold, subscribing keeps that door open. You're also welcome to leave a comment about what you noticed or what felt different as you listened. Sometimes namming it once is enough. This isn't the beginning of something dramatic, it's the settling of something true.